morning, everyone. Good morning once again. Welcome to day 2 of the 14th edition of the All Kenyan Moot competition. We're going to start the day with our third and final panel for this edition on fiscal sustainability. And before we begin, I'd like to invite Joanne to lead us in a word of prayer, after which I'll proceed to introduce the moderator who will be taking us through the panel today. Joanne.
Let us humble ourselves and pray. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, we thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for today as we're going to start today's panel session as well as the mood session. We pray that your blessings be with us. We pray that the Holy Spirit guides us. In Jesus' name I pray and believe. Amen.
Thank you so much, Joanne. And now, please join me in welcoming the 14th edition conference director, Ms. Catherine Kiruma, who's going to be our moderator for the panel. A warm round of applause.
We are also joined by Ms. Ivy Gikonyo, who is the project officer at the Center for Human Rights, Pretoria, and a candidate for PhD focusing on sovereign debt. A round of an applause, everyone. We're also privileged to have Mr. Jacob Wanyonyi, who is a researcher at KIPRA, Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. A round of an applause, everyone. Thank you. Our last panelist, everyone, is Mr. Chacha Mochage. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will begin this conversation. And the conversation for today is very timely because we are at a time where public debt is growing severely in Kenya, and it currently stands at 11.7 trillion. And at the same time, the cost of servicing this debt has serious implications. And these implications are not only economic, but they've trickled down to be also constitutional. And therefore, with this, we shall have conversations, and we shall start with Mr. Titus, who is from TI. And a question to you is that in the context of rising public debt and shrinking fiscal space, how should fiscal sustainability be understood within Kenya's constitutional framework, and perhaps maybe give us principles that should guide long-term public finance to serve as a foundational question for this conversation, and also to allow for understanding for our participants. Welcome, Mr. Titus.
Yeah, thank you very much. Allow me to start by just appreciating and recognizing how far the All Kenya Moot Court competition has come. As an alumni of KUSOL, I'm very proud of how far we have gotten and the kind of advancements that we are having, sustaining these conversations, and being part of very important discourses within our country. So really from the bottom of my heart is to really appreciate KUSOL, the team that has been organizing the All Kenya Moot Court competition. And as Transparency International, we remain to be partners and will continue supporting. So that said, I think just to highlight on what you have spoken to, the Constitution of Kenya and Chapter 12 of the Constitution on Public Finance Management outlines various principles and also provisions that dictate how public finance management in Kenya should be undertaken. And among these is Article 201 that outlines the principles of public finance management. That includes also paramount there is transparency, accountability, and public participation. So when you're looking at the articles and or the principles under Article 201, they reflect a lot of the other constitutional infrastructure around Article 10 on national values and principles of governance, Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity, and every other chapter that has principles. So the issues of transparency, accountability, and public participation have been woven within our constitutional infrastructure to the point that we expect nothing less from all our public entities. And when it comes to public debt, of course, this again, much as we have the general principles, the Constitution even goes further to provide for how public debt is to be incurred by the national government and the counties. Of course, under Article, I think, 211 or thereabout, it dictates how public debt should be incurred by the two levels of government. And it also goes further to mandate various institutions. Paramount among them is Parliament that oversees the budget-making process, approves budgets, and also is the one that receives the Auditor General reports on public debt. So ideally, when National Treasury concludes an agreement or a loan agreement, Parliament should be made aware within, I think, is it 2 months, that certain agreement has already been achieved, and these are the concessions that we have made, what the payment will look like, what are the interest rates, and all that. Parliament also receives from the Auditor General, I think after every financial year, the status of public debt repayments and all that. So there is a very huge mandate that Parliament has been given on management of public debt. And of course, that is where our colleague from the Parliamentary Budget Office would definitely be here to give us more insights on what Parliament has been doing. But over and above Parliament, there is a control of budget that also manages how funds are being utilized within government expenditure processes. And like I've already mentioned, the Auditor General. So there are institutions that are there, there are laws. The Public Finance Management Act also outlines various laws around public debt management, both for the national government and also for the county governments. So the legal and institutional infrastructure is there, and the regulatory infrastructure is there. And for us, we expect that now the public institutions, especially the National Treasury and of course other government entities that are involved in these processes, would follow and adhere to what has been set out in the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned a very important aspect on transparency, and we've also seen global institutions such as the IMF repeatedly warning about opaque loan agreements, which brings another important aspect of citizen participation. And therefore, allow me to address this next question to Mr. Tom Ogada, whereby building onto the criticisms of Kenya's fiscal governance, where the point raised is that citizens are not usually involved in these decisions. So from your perspective, how can digital transparency infrastructure and open budget platforms enhance real-time monitoring and traceability of public funds?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes. Based on that question, I think we have to agree that there has been some progress that has been, or mechanisms that have been put in place with, let me say, since the 2024 pricings. Okay, and the government has been trying to see on how to incorporate Kenyans in public participations processes. However, from where I sit and from where we stand, I think it is not adequate. Whatever has been happening is still not yet adequate. Why am I saying so? The ongoing, for instance, in the ongoing funds, where the National Infrastructure Fund, the participation on the Safaricom partial divestiture, we've seen what is happening. And I think what we have been seeing in form of public participation is more elite. It is not accessible to everyone. And I think just trying to converge with what Titus was saying is there is the public participation bill that is before Parliament, if I'm not wrong. And that is what is defining, or is supposed to define, provide proper frameworks on how the public should be engaged in public participation. So from where we stand, there is still limited participation of the general public. Then now you've talked about the digital aspect. I want to believe that there is a lot of things have been brought in place to try to improve how accountability in issues public finance can be done. If we start from the e-procurement that was launched last year, I think, or the previous year, we also have infrastructures like the IFMIS, we have e-citizen, we have for KRA, we have e-teams and the likes. However, the other aspects, we are not seeing transparency. There are transparency questions that are arising based on the Auditor General's report. And when we look at the Auditor General's report, it is saying that amounts, for instance, I think it is with e-citizen, there was some amount that the Auditor General said could not be traced, amount that had gone into e-citizen. So that says even us moving to the digital infrastructure still, it is not curing the leakages that they're supposed to cure. So that is something that we are witnessing. But in real sense, how should we engage the public when things that are supposed to cure the leakages are not working efficiently as they should? So one of the things that we are supposed to see with the digital infrastructure, for example, e-procurement, all the processes should run through. I think that is the ideal picture that the government painted to us when we were told that we will be moving to e-procurement. That is where you see requests are being made there. Even the budgets are being uploaded through the system, so that in case there is insufficient absorption of the budget, the system will reveal. And people can trace and say, X amount was released for road, the road X to be constructed. Only from the system, we are seeing that 80% has been disbursed or has been used. But when we go to the ground, we are seeing 30% completion of the road. Where's the mismatch? Or we could be told that money has been disbursed, but when you go to the ground, there's no contractor on the ground. So that is where, when we can get that kind of information, then the citizens can now start following through social accountability or social audits. Then now you can question the government based on the information that is available on the system. But up to this moment, as things are right now, we are seeing there's a mismatch. You can look at, for example, the NEMIS. That one is the one which that is being used in the education sector. Until the Auditor General flagged the issue of ghost schools, the ministry were not aware. If they were aware, they didn't inform the public. That is the Ministry of Education. So the Auditor General said, we have ghost schools that are present. So the Ministry of Education went out. The question is, can the public have that capacity to also follow through the systems to understand where the gaps are? So that is still what is missing with the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tom. So to Ms. Patricia, we've seen that transparency mechanisms are not sufficient, and we've seen institutions being put into place. For example, we see the Parliament, whose critical role is approving, borrowing, and overseeing public finance. So how effective has Parliament been in exercising oversight over Kenya's borrowing processes?
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be back, and congratulations again for a successful launch of the 14th edition. When Titus and my colleague from TISA also was speaking, what we see is that the law is there, the constitution and other enabling laws are there. We have a parliament that has been given oversight powers, and even when we were getting the Constitution of Kenya 2010, there was a strengthening of parliament that happened with the and of course other institutions such as the judiciary, with the expectation that the separation of powers will be better, there will be a better checks and balances, and of course now as we're talking about public debt, and then of course the oversight. The Constitution, Article 211 and other provisions under the the Public Finance Management Act, actually provides that loans, the borrowing should be approved by Parliament. But then if we look at where we are today, we are almost hitting 11.8 trillion debt, and we are talking about sustainability of it as a question. Then there's a problem, because when parliamentary approval is given as a power to Parliament, it is an expectation that one part of that is not only transparency, but also providing a debt ceiling. But if we were to do an examination of debt over the years, and you will see that we have overshot that the ceiling. If you look at, let me say, the previous two, the previous government and the current one as an example, it is in the previous government where the debt ceiling was actually upped. And then, of course, we got the amendment to the Public Finance Management Act that now said that the ceiling will be capped at 55% of the GDP. But even that has been exceeded. And well, the law says it can be exceeded by a certain percentage, but we see no recourse for what happens when that is exceeded. What is the basis for exceeding that debt? And even under the Public Finance Management Act, the exceeding those limits, there should be a basis for it, but we have not seen that corrective measure. That act had required that after the act comes into place, that corrective measures be introduced to ensure that going forward we remain under those ceilings, but that has not happened. So what happens now in terms of parliamentary effectiveness? So we keep going higher and higher. What does that mean invariably for citizens? It means that a lot of money now, that the revenue or any other money we are getting goes back towards servicing debt. And the larger impact of that, it means that citizens cannot get services prioritized, because if a lot of the money is going back into the servicing the debt, then compromises happen in provision of basic services like health, education, and food and agriculture. And you can actually see, if you were to do a technical analysis here, you'd actually see that is actually happening. And then the other question has been raised is the issue of transparency. It would be expected that because Parliament has the approval powers, it means that it's not only approving the loans themselves, but also because it has a role in the budget making process and even expenditure, that it's actually doing it's also overseeing expenditure. The requirement by the law is that even the money that comes through loans, it should be directed to specific programs. but we don't have that transparency to be able to know fully when we get this money coming to the exchequer, what is it exactly used for. And the issue of transparency, you will see it even in other funds. For instance, with the housing levy, it was established, of course, with a lot of resistance from Kenyans. But then, of course, it passed through. And they said this is the purpose of this housing levy. But what has happened even later on, the absorption has not happened. And then there are questions about this money being channeled elsewhere. That brings an accountability issue. Let me come back to the role of Parliament as a representative body. When members of Parliament are elected, their role is to represent Kenyans. And the voice of Kenyans need to be also considered in the public debt-making decisions. But we have a situation where, and we can even just demonstrate even in other instances where Kenyans have raised concerns about the debt. I think all of us here, at one point or another, we have made representations in Parliament about certain issues about debt and even some of the proposed laws and actions by the executive. But decisions are made anyway, irrespective. A good example, the Finance Bill 2024. Can you imagine? I still can't believe that happened when you think about it, that Kenyans were outside protesting and parliamentary and MPs were in the House passing a bill that people are saying no to. That kind of apathy towards concerns of Kenyans is reflected in how even the debt situation is concerned. Every day we worry about the debt rising, but we don't see the commensurate pushback from Parliament because it is actually the oversight body. But of course, the issue is broader, and I will come back to it as a governance issue. Then coming back to legislating, we have seen Parliament, yes, the law is there. There's the problem of not implementing, and implementation is a factor of failure also of oversight. Secondly, we also seen Parliament failing to put a check on executive decisions. Any function of appropriating funds is a function of Parliament, but we see executive going ahead anyway, like the recent fund that my colleague referred to, the infrastructure fund. When it was introduced, there was no legislative basis for it. It came as a cabinet of approval. Of course, there's a court case going on about it. And then, of course, then in the process of that court case going on, now there's a bill that was proposed. Again, I think all of us in one way gave our own views about it, and we raised certain issues. Of course, one of the issues in that law also, they are saying it actually has an implication for debt situation in Kenya, because even the body they are creating was given certain powers. We have raised those issues and other governance concerns. Then what happens? The bill is passed anyway. What does that mean? That the oversight, the representative function and the legislative functions are not being met effectively. And coming back now to the broader question, when you talk about Parliament as the body that's supposed to check the executive and other bodies, it's not happening effectively. Because now, we have where the law says approval by Parliament to be getting reports from the executive about the situation of debt, the concessions Kenya has made, approvals for money to be drawn from the consolidated funds where the debt money borrowing goes to, or even other funds created by Parliament. We don't see that happening 100%. On the question of transparency, the question of debt has been raised as not fully transparent, and there's an ongoing case that was moved by the Senator Okiya Mtata, and now other partners are also there. One of the issues there is the lawfulness of Kenya's debt. Why? Because the law says this, and the practice says something different. And one of the issues was the issues of approval, the parliamentary approval having not been considered in certain instances. And then also some of the money that is borrowed is not being put to the programmatic intervention that it was supposed to be put for. And there are also other questions of part of transparency in action on reports of the Auditor General, who has been consistently giving us pointers where something is going wrong. And well, we see sometimes questions happening in Parliament, in both houses, or summons happening to the respective executive bodies, or in some cases with the Senate, the county government. We don't see that. We don't see action after that. What happens when the Auditor General points out inaction that then also affects the debt situation in Kenya. And maybe to conclude as we go on other issues is to say that the fact that we have a case the debt situation in Kenya, then there's a effectiveness of Parliament. And the broader concern at a governance level is, why has Parliament donated or neglected its oversight powers to the point where now we see executive dominance or executive non-accountability? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patricia, for that elaborate answer. The next question is addressed to Mr. Emmanuel. So, from your experience in fiscal policy and taxation systems, what structural weaknesses within Kenya's tax administration and revenue mobilization systems contribute to persistent fiscal deficits and reliance on borrowing?
All right. Good morning, everyone. First, let me say that I am very proud of your school. I'm not an alumni, but I'm working with alumni from this school, and the reason why I'm saying this is that they are stars at our farm. Yeah. So you're doing a very good job. On that question, there are many structural issues with our tax administration, but I'll talk about three core ones. The first is the structure of our taxes, or how do we raise our taxes? So if you look at the revenue numbers for the last 3 financial years, you will notice that when it comes to income tax, which is the core source of tax revenue, 55 to 60% of income taxes come from pay as you earn. Or essentially, this is the taxes that are collected from employees. If you look at that as a percentage of the total revenue, it's 20 to 25%. Yeah. Now, what that means is that you're relying on a very small group of people to fund government expenditure. And you're limited in terms of how far you can go in doing that. So we've seen that 2 years ago, the government raised the tax rates for PAYE from a top rate of 30%. There's now a rate of 32.5% and 35%. Yeah, it is because it's so that this is where we could raise money. The government is targeting exactly the same group to fund affordable housing. So in as much as the affordable housing levy is applicable to everyone who is a resident in Kenya, and the same case for SHASHIF, the people who are really funding those levies are people in employment. Now, there's a limit to how much you can raise from them. Yeah, you cannot continue to increase those rates whenever you want to increase revenue. So the government is limited in revenue mobilization because of the taxes that it has in place. We have a very large informal workforce that remains untaxed. The reasons for this have not been properly or clearly explained, because the government has introduced things like turnover tax, which were meant to target, people doing small businesses, so that they can make their due contribution according to their size to the revenue. We know the government has implemented a new system targeting landlords, but there are a lot of people in the economy who are not making a contribution or who are not being targeted by the government. So that's the first constraint, that the government is looking at a small group of people who are already compliant to raise a lot of revenue. The other thing is that government policy changes too much, on tax matters. So we have a national tax policy that guides how tax laws should be formulated, but it is seldom followed. For us who are in the practice, we are frustrated by the fact that the government will introduce tax incentives this year and then do away with them next year and possibly reintroduce them in a modified form the other year. And what that does is that it makes it very difficult for investors to plan, and even for the government itself to plan revenue measures well. That practice is also symptomatic of the fact that government policy is not well thought out. It is being influenced on an ad hoc basis by interest groups. So that again limits the government's ability to mobilize revenue, because it is acting inconsistently without a good plan or a consistent plan, and it is discouraging investors, because investors need certainty. If someone is going to invest 1 billion shillings this year, they need to know how they are going to recoup that 1 billion shillings. And without predictability, that decision is not possible. The third thing is corruption. So corruption in revenue administration and corruption in the use of public funds. With respect to revenue administration, I'm sure you've seen reports of KRA officers being prosecuted. I think 2-3 years ago we saw a large group of managers being arraigned in court. So that is only a small part of the level of corruption at KRA. And in the last, let me say, since this government took over, it's become more brazen. And obviously with corruption, it means that the revenue officers are not doing what they should be doing. They are not collecting the amount of tax they should be collecting. And it goes further to even oppress taxpayers, because as a practitioner, I see it as a hurdle. When I have clients, they are not willing to engage in corruption, but they're going to be frustrated because of that. With respect to corruption in the use of public funds, a lot of times people ask, where is my money going? I am happy to pay these taxes, but for what? When people are using this money that I'm paying to buy properties in Dubai or other places. So it means that taxpayers are not supportive of government revenue mobilization efforts. I have come across clients from Nordic jurisdictions as well as the UK who are embarrassed to plan their affairs in such a way that they minimize tax. They do not want to have a conversation about how to minimize tax because it's frowned upon in their countries. The society frowns upon that. Why? Because government uses revenue properly to fund public goods, healthcare, education, and so on. And there cannot be a reason why you'd try to minimize your taxes. You should carry your due burden. The opposite is what we have in Kenya because of the way the government is using money, and we don't trust that our taxes will be put into proper use. People are more willing to take chances or to devise schemes that minimize their taxes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel. So, policy decisions often rely on research institutions, and that brings me to the role of KIPRA, which is Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research, and I will address this question to Mr. Jacob. So, how do you balance debt sustainability goals with the obligation to ensure the progression of realization of socioeconomic rights? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and on behalf of KIPRA, Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, we are extremely grateful for this invitation, and thank you so much for inviting all of us in the panel for this discussion. So KIPRA is a public organization which is under the State Department for Economic Planning and National Treasury, and we offer policy advice to the government through the research work that we do, and that policy advice, we offer it across all the various organs of the government, that is the executive, the legislature, even the county governments, and so on. So I think my colleagues who have spoken before me, I think they have really laid a very good foundation in terms of especially the legal and policy framework that is in place. I think they have really mentioned very well. I don't need to repeat, but I really liked the idea of the Constitution itself through the Public Finance chapter. And then we have what is called the Public Finance Management Act of 2012. And on taxation, I think my fellow panelists have talked about the taxation policy, which guides the government on how to raise national revenues. Then we also have what is called the medium-term revenue strategy. It's called the MTRS, which now kind of gives the government a three-year planning phase in terms of revenue. So maybe just to go to the very basic level so that we understand why we are in a debt situation. Annually, the government's ability to collect revenue is quite limited. For example, the government can only manage about 2.8 trillion in revenue. 2.8 trillion. Kindly take note of that, 2.8 trillion. That is all our revenue sources. My colleague has talked about personal income tax. We have pay as you earn, which is largely the personal income tax. We have corporate tax. Corporations actually also pay tax, which goes to the government. We have value-added tax, which is largely a consumption tax. So most goods you consume in the supermarket, in the shops, you'll pay 16% VAT to the exchequer. So that contributes to the revenue to the government. We have customs duty, okay, or excise tax. That is when you import various goods and services, there are some tax elements you have to pay, and I think we have others. Then in addition now to the levies, the Social Health Authority, SHA, the housing levy, those who drive, I think you pay the Petroleum Development Levy. So maybe you may ask, why is government doing all this? Government does all this to ensure fiscal sustainability. The government is really trying to raise as much revenue and as much resources as possible, because the government understands that without raising revenue, it may not be able to provide you the necessary goods and services as the citizens of this country. So revenue, 2.8 trillion. What about expenditure? Expenditure, I think now we are looking in the direction of 4 trillion shillings. Maybe that will be the next budget. So the difference between those two, you can only get 2.8 trillion, but the needs of the country amount to 4 trillion. So that difference is what is called the fiscal deficit. It's just like you. Actually, if you want to understand debt very well, don't look at it at the national level. Look at it at your household level. You as your household. This is the income you receive. But these are the needs you have. So the beauty is that sometimes us in the households, somehow, we are able to meet all our expenditures. But for a national government, it's not easy, because many things come along the way, unplanned expenditures. Like now you can see the flooding situation. Just a few days ago we had the drought situation. These are things that hit the government also unexpectedly. And the government will not sit there and tell you, sorry Kenyans, we don't have resources to take care of that. They have to do everything possible. So colleagues, I think just to be sincere, debt is inevitable. Debt is inevitable. If someone tells you Kenya should operate without debt, I think they will not be very sincere, because you really need to understand what generates debt. And I think, as my panel colleagues have said, as a country, we have a problem with revenue mobilization. So today, our VAT, for example, is 16%. I'm sure if everyone in this room seated here, if we are told, how do you see we raise VAT to 20% and then the government will not borrow? Surely, by show of hand, how many will pass that proposal? Just be sincere and honest. How many will pass and say, yes, raise VAT on everything to 20%, but do not borrow? How many will support such a policy? Nobody. Even me, myself, seated here, I can't support. So colleagues, I think debt is inevitable. We always have to borrow because our expenditures far outweigh our revenue capabilities. But now, what is our policy advice to the government? Our policy advice to the government is ensure borrowing is sustainable. That the money you borrow, first of all, it should not exceed, I liked my colleague who said 55% of GDP, because that's the current cap, okay? Initially it was 6 trillion. At another year it came to 9 trillion. At another year it came to 12 trillion. Then the government thought this putting a cap at a nominal level, 6, 9, 12 trillion is not good. Let's have it as a percent of GDP. So they passed it at 55%, but that is in present value. So as we sit here now, our debt to GDP ratio, as we are talking now, is 67% of GDP. So debt will always be there. What we only need to do is to manage the debt, and the National Treasury does this through what is called debt liability operations, okay? Because our debt is normally, it has what is called maturity. So there are those debts that mature very soon, the short-term debts. Then there are those which mature much later. So as a government, they do what is called debt liability operations, just to make sure that you are able to service debts that are maturing shortly, as you also plan for other debts. So for us, the advice we give is, yes, we can borrow, but the government should ensure that its debt servicing should not constrain public service delivery. Because currently, our debt servicing is about 50%. So what does that mean? It means for every 100 shillings we collect as a government, about 50 shillings of that goes to service our debt. So that is where we are advising that we need to lower our debt burden, and then by lowering our debt burden, ultimately it will also lower our debt servicing, so that we don't need to pay all our revenue this debt. We just need to ensure that only a small fraction of our revenues goes to service debt, so that the other remaining balance goes to government. So just to conclude is just to say that we normally offer advice through policy briefs. We prepare what is called a policy brief to the government on public debt, and not just public debt, but really all possible areas of the economy. And also, we prepare what is called policy memoranda, okay? So in a policy memoranda, we are able to tell the government what it should do, like now what we've just spoken about. And when we are invited by the government, we normally appear before the government to give our views, to give our reflections. Like we've appeared before the National Assembly, especially the Public Debt and Privatization Committee. We appeared before them and we gave them our policy prescriptions on how to tackle debt. So I think the government is doing the best it can. KRA has even established what is called the Small Taxpayers Office. It has also established what is called I think there is an office which is meant to expand the tax base, okay? So I just want to assure that the government is really doing everything it can to manage debt. The only challenge we have to face is to limit the cost of servicing our debt and ultimately improving our fiscal finances. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacob. That was very well explained. And now allow me to request Ms. Ivy to give us a comparative perspective, also based on your studies on sovereign debt, where I know many African countries are currently navigating debt burdens. So from a comparative perspective, what alternative fiscal management strategies could Kenya adopt to reduce reliance on borrowing while still financing development priorities?
Thank you. Checking the time. It's good morning. Good morning. Yeah, so during my introduction, one thing that was missed, the most important part, is that I were once classmates. So it's just that one of us was seated while the other was standing at the board. Yes, I'm an alumnus of Kenyatta University, a proud one. And so, yeah, for those who are seated here, I look forward to interacting with you out here. With Kenyatta University is relatively young, and so the alumni that are out there are quite few compared to other universities. But the places that you find them, it's crazy. One time we met with Dr. Kabata, we were with how many of your students in Addis? At a random conference. So, yeah, like 4. So, the question for comparative analysis. I like that it has already been established that not all debt is bad. Debt is perhaps what you can call a necessary evil. It helps us so from a human rights perspective, to ensure the dignity of people now, But for it to be sustainable, it also means ensuring that you are leaving not a burden, but you are also planting the right seeds for the coming generation. When you talk about dignity, we are talking about ensuring that right now people have, that there is no Kenyan, I mean, we can't be borrowing to do other things when there's a Kenyan who's dying of hunger. We can't be borrowing when we have people going to hospitals and being turned away. Dignity, how do you say that Kenyans have dignity when you have, right now we are in March, and we still have students who've not yet reported to school because of lack of fees, because of lack of transport. Yeah, I mean, it can all be explained where the money is going, which we are borrowing, but the fact that not all basic needs have been met raises a question. So speaking of sustainability, what is sustainable debt? Without explaining, because fiscal sustainability is a term for economists, and I'm a lawyer. But from a Wanjiku perspective, fiscal sustainability, I'll give an example of Mozambique. So recently, there was the unearthing, a few years back, unearthing of hidden debts amounting to about $2 billion US. Now, that you should have said, wow. But you see, it's because that amount is so crazy, it doesn't resonate with us who deal with a few thousand shillings every day. $2 billion US. Try to convert it to Kenya shillings. That money was unaccounted for. And what happened? Do you think Mozambique doesn't have a public debt management system and offices and all that? It does. But still, there was a hidden debt. The debt was supposed to be for the development of their maritime economy, so for their ships and shipping businesses and fishing businesses. But that money ended up in people's pockets, in offshore accounts. So that led to economic collapse. That led to the country defaulting on its debts. And things got bad, like very bad. I know Kenyans, let me not say we think we have it bad. Yeah, it's rough, but it is not as rough. I've been to a country where you go to a restaurant, but with the menu, there's no amounts. You know how, yeah, it's chips, 200, what, tea, it's there. They can't put the price because things are changing every hour. So we'll tell you the price when you're ordering. When you order, the bill will come, and that's when you'll know how much it is at that time. Now, it feels very far-fetched, but imagine it happening to Kenya. I'm telling you to imagine it because, as it is, there is a lot that we do not know as citizens. We do not know, these levels of debt, we do not know how it is apportioned. We don't know how much was borrowed for a particular project. We really are in the dark. We were not asked whether we should actually incur the debt that we've incurred. We were not consulted. Yet, the fact is that every coin that is borrowed in your name. So when whoever appends their signature is appending on your behalf, because you are the one who will pay. You and the children that you have or are yet to have, and their children's children. So the question is, from a comparative perspective, there's a lot there are a lot of examples of not so good examples, but there are some that we can actually emulate. I like that it has already been mentioned, the the fact that in Kenya, one of our issues is that we are not able to collect as much tax as we need to, because I think for every 100 shillings, we are supposed to be able to collect. The target in Africa is about 20 or 25 shillings for every 100. And I think right now we are at 17 shillings. Now, in Rwanda, their tax to GDP ratio is above 20%. And the way that what they were able to do this was by increasing the tax, the tax that they're able to collect. Now, am I calling for us to be taxed more? No, because we've already been told there are people and organizations that are falling through the cracks that are not being taxed, hence our overtaxation. So it's for those to be included in the tax bracket. We have an example of Botswana. So for them, they are a mineral dependent country, and they've been able to really hone on their, from that revenue stream, so that their public debt levels is about 20 to 25% of their GDP. We are at, you said 67. Oh, I didn't mention Mozambique right now is about 92. So Botswana, significantly lower than other countries. The debt ceiling has been mentioned here. We have countries in Africa that have debt ceilings. Now, Kenya has been said we have a debt ceiling of 55. It's just that we don't follow. Or when we need more, just raise the ceiling. It's just like saying you need more money, print more money. So that ceiling, if it can be pushed at will, it is basically non-existent. So there are examples for us to emulate, but again, echoing the general sentiments here is that the issue is not so much about legal limits, but a lot to do with political willpower and strengthening our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ivy. That was well answered. The next question, I will address it to Mr. Chacha. So for us to get a policy maker's perspective, so what measures are currently in place to ensure there is transparency and public disclosure to address audit concerns and restore public trust?
Okay. That's a very good question, and thank you so much for this opportunity to sit on this panel. This is my first moot court attendance. I've never attended a moot court. I'm a fiscal analyst. I purely look at numbers from morning till evening. But lately, those of us who practice fiscal policy on a daily basis, we are moving closely into the legal field, because most of the solutions that we have, it is those who sit in this room who will give us those solutions. Our office, whenever you make a presentation, the first thing our director will ask you, so what? You've determined what the problem is, you know the cost, the risk, you've calculated the forecast and everything, then the question is, so what? So the message that I wanted to come here today, when I thank you so much for this opportunity, is that we need to create solution providers to the issues that we are faced. Because I can tell you for sure, the issue of public debt and fiscal sustainability is a matter that we'll all have to carry here within a legal aspect, or the economic specialist, whatever perspective you'll carry as a Kenyan. From public debt perspective, if I can explain for you the progress that we've been working on. Myself, I'm a fiscal analyst from the Parliamentary Budget Office. About 10 years ago, public debt was about 1.89 trillion shillings. Still minimal, but about 42% of GDP. The debt to GDP ratio is a very critical component when you're looking at public debt sustainability. I'll get to the question. But then from around 2010, the graph just starts moving up. It steeps. And we started asking ourselves, what is going on? So about 2017, I was sent as the officer to study the numbers on fiscal debt and why the fiscal deficit is being sustained and what is making the public debt to grow. We came up with policies. We didn't see a response to that. We established a debt unit in response for that. We didn't see a response. When we were crossing over into this parliament, the Parliamentary Budget Office recommended the creation of a separate committee of parliament just to deal with matters of public debt, which has been mentioned here today by my colleague from Kipra, is a Public Debt and Privatization Committee, because we have observed that this is a risk that is there that members of parliament will have to address. Okay? Then, coming to your question now, we have skills, we have members of parliament looking at this. So why isn't public debt reacting to the policies that we are putting in place? The issue that we came to understand is that the area or the fiscal environment that you're operating in has changed. Back in 2012, when we were putting in place the PFM Act 2012, it seemed like a very heavy and good document to provide oversight because the level of public debt was low. Today, we are at 12.3 trillion Kenya shillings as of December last year, not even 11 trillion. We are at 12.3 trillion. You yourself, you can calculate the rate of growth of public debt over that period of time. The issue of debt servicing expenditures, which has been mentioned, and how it links in a critical aspect to provision of goods and services by government, because that's how government ends up meeting your rights under Article 43 of the Constitution. Provision of goods and services, how we finance it, and the expenditures which has been discussed here. So we continue to analyze and look into this framework and ask ourselves what is going on, how come we cannot control the fiscal deficit. If you want to look at their sustainability, you look at the fiscal deficit. And the fiscal deficit can be, if it is good, if it builds to the economical growth. Previous fiscal deficits, the fiscal deficit is your revenue minus expenditure. You can have a surplus or a deficit. So it is good if it builds to economical growth. You end up seeing, you're moving the growth from 5%, where we're stagnating right now, to about 10%. And that's what the office is pushing for. We need to move to about 10% GDP growth rate in real terms. Create that environment to allow investment into the economy so that you can be able to stimulate the economy. And at that particular level, when you're handling at 10%, we're assuming your revenues are growing very fast. The critical sectors are moving the economy, and you're able to stabilize the debt to GDP ratio, again, that I indicated. So now, at the current environment that we're working in, to answer your question, is about the current environment that we're working in. Kenya has got a very extensive, I can call it oversight framework. Not only is it that the Constitution requires every single individual to oversight its own government. You, individual, as you sit here right now, you're required to contribute to every single law, contribute to the expenditures, and give your voice. That is how the Constitution puts in place. If you run through, and then we also, the other aspect is that we have a very good and strong civil society framework. We have very good and well-financed civil society environment whereby people are able to speak out and criticize the government, criticize parliament, criticize all institutions, and look into documents and see this is the direction that we're heading to, and say it is wrong. If you run through chapter 12 of the Constitution, chapter 12 of the Constitution, if you from 201 to 231, and that's where we specialize in. I think this time when we were preparing for this, one of the few times I've read Article 43 of the Constitution. I never go that far. I only go to chapter 12 and I am done. The aspect I'm bringing here, if you look through chapter 12, you have the control of budget. You have the Auditor General. You have CRA. You have Parliament playing its role in there. So the environment for which the government of Kenya is supposed to operate is already there. Now, the part that we are having here is missing bits and pieces. Things like fiscal discipline. If you say that you're supposed to create a fiscal path that will reduce your public debt service to a particular ratio, then you should be able to do so. If you don't do that, then you create costs and risks that pile up into the future. And bringing that, speaking of the future, is that the Constitution speaks about costs and benefits and burdens of current borrowing to be spread with future generations. And this is very interesting because when you discuss the issue of public debt, you're not talking about it today. You're imagining yourself as an elderly gentleman or lady and your children are sitting in KU and discussing about public debt. That is what you talk about when you say consideration of future generations. Their voices are supposed to be heard here today. The other bits and pieces that are missing is things like we have transparency to some extent, but transparency alone doesn't work. And the Constitution talks about openness and accountability. With transparency without accountability, there's nothing you're doing. You might even just stay untransparent, by the way, because you'll end up telling people this is where, the money is. So be transparent, but be accountable. So Parliament creates that environment for, we are trying to be open. If you go to the parliamentary website, there are reports. If you read our reports, you will get so much information. Parliament responds when we're taken to court on so many issues. We will be there. We will try to present our case in court. We will go to the ground to the best of our ability. For example, on the matter that has been mentioned let's talk about this, something that is live, the Safaricom shares. I was part of the team and we did about 29 counties, One of these time we arrived in Kisii, so we are there in a hall like this with about 200 people, 300 people. One of the people stands up and says, we support the sale of Safaricom shares. Then we're like, okay. Then he says, in fact, it's sell State House, sell Parliament, sell everything. I'm trying to say here is that the transparency bit is I think one of the easiest aspects to be met. Conditions for accountability now, that is where you who sit in this room can help us as economists to achieve that. Most of the times when I sit and I think about corruption in Kenya, I usually wish that it's Tanzanians who steal our money. I wish it's Ugandans who steal our money. I wish it's Ethiopians who come to steal our money. But the truth is Kenyans stealing Kenyan money. To some extent you start wondering, what is wrong with our public finances that us as Kenyans just can't say, let's leave that money that was meant to build a road at an efficient and effective cost on that, but the way it's supposed to be done. That is where now those in the legal aspect help us. You are now at the tip of the spear. To complete this process, it is you who are sitting in this room that are able to finish that component of accountability. Now, those are the challenges that we're dealing with. In terms of public debt, in terms of utilization of government resources, which for ourselves we say we need to create environment whereby use in an efficient and effective manner. And I'm putting this because, just to finalize, that when you don't pay your taxes, you'll be punished. It's compulsory. It's one of the qualities of taxation. It's compulsory. If you don't pay your taxes, you will go to jail. You will pay a fine. So what happens when the expenditures are not incurred in the correct manner, then you have a right to expect that your shilling that you give to the public purse is spent in an efficient and effective manner. So what we are looking at right now, in creating an environment whereby you can be able to incur expenditure in an efficient environment, so that what you talk about social rights can be able to be provided to people of Kenya, is that you have to look at the law itself. You have to look at the expenditures that are being done by national government. And the issue about Parliament, I know Parliament has been criticized. Trust you me, I can take it. And I hope to hear a lot of your comments on this. Is that most of the times we'll sit in and we'll say, this fiscal deficit for year X is very high. In fact, by the way, we don't ourselves determine the fiscal deficit, is the government, and our forecasts within the next, on average for the next about 5 years, we'll be spending around 920 to about 950 to a trillion shillings in the fiscal deficit. That means we'll be piling up approximately 920 to a trillion shillings on the fiscal deficit, on the public debt over the medium term. When you do so, and you bring that to members of parliament, I remember reading a book some time back by Omar Ising, and he says that you can't take, let's say, monetary policy to members of parliament because they are controlled by the whims of the electorate. If you come and tell members of parliament, we are doing 1 trillion Kenya shillings this year, but we are going to give all of you dispensaries. We will do for you roads. Okay? Members of parliament will stop thinking about that fiscal deficit. They will say, in fact, they say, we are going to give 450 billion shillings for counties. We are going to spend this much money. Most likely is that the moment you give them that structure, we will deal with that fiscal deficit later. And that is what tends to makes probably Parliament wants to spend money for the people, because that is what will bring them back. That's what controls them. And that tends to be the weakness of Parliament. And that's why the last point to answer your question is institutionalization of the entire fiscal structure. You have the controller budget, Auditor General, you have the National Treasury. You need to create an environment whereby policies on fiscal policies are automatically implemented without the need of oversight. Let every single person within those offices, they just do their job. Just do fiscal discipline. When we passed the 55% of debt to GDP ratio, by that time, the limit, we had approached the limit. The budget had just been brought to Parliament, and I think we had a fiscal room of around 400 billion shillings. If we're going to pass that appropriation bill, it will imply that we cut down expenditure substantially, and that would impact government expenditure, which will end up impacting service delivery and GDP growth rate. And what would happen when you do something like that? A lot of cuts end up happening. So the threshold came in, and we agreed with the National Treasury that would bring it down to 55% over a period of 5 years. So it's supposed to be met by 2028. You see, we also work with the trust, with other institutions. We oversight, they implement. So you need to create institutions that work to create that fiscal environment to ensure that fiscal sustainability is maintained for social economic development. I think the issue about public debt and social economic development is a matter that is very broad. I'm not sure we can maybe cover it in one single sitting, but it's my hope that we try as much as we can to explain it better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chacha. Because of time and upon a successful conversations for the specific questions for our panelists, we will proceed to a general questions where I will invite brief remarks from our panelists. So the theme basically for the 14th edition has been on reclaiming constitutionalism, where the question mainly is, what does reclaiming constitutionalism in public finance look like? And I think I will invite brief remarks. We can start with Mr. Titus. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Great. I think I want to start by agreeing with Mr. Chacha here that achieving transparency is relatively easy, but the accountability becomes a bit challenging. So my remarks maybe to that question, I will go to categorizing the principles under Article 201 into 5, and you will bear with me to see whether we can do a score on government performance in adherence to those principles. So the first of those principles is openness and accountability. So when you're looking at fiscal accountability and all these things, how do we score the government on issues of openness? So on openness is what now Mr. Chacha was talking about, transparency. We have access to budget documents, we have the budget policy statement, the outlook papers. We have quite a lot of information as Kenyans. If you go to Central Bank of Kenya, you'll find the public debt register, you'll find there is actually information that is there. So on openness, other than the matters that are in court, and I think Patricia mentioned, today we are in court on the odious debt case. It's been heard today in front of a 3-judge bench. And so with time we can expound more on what we are at. But on openness, it's up to you. You can give maybe, is it meeting expectations? We go with CBC. Yeah? Is it approaching? Something like that. No, not exceeding. It cannot be. Hapo exceeding expectations, I'm not sure I can go with that. So when it comes to accountability, accountability is just where, how many people do you think have been held accountable for misuse of public resources? How well have we addressed the recommendations that come from the Office of the Auditor General report? So on that, you can all give your results. It is below? Sini below expectation? Ama nyinyi amjasoma CBC? So it is below expectation. The second principle is on equality. Equality dictates that government should ensure equality on both revenue generation and expenditure. On revenue, our tax expert has already told us we have an uneven, as in it's as if we do not even know, we do not follow the policy on tax, our tax policy. So you've put a burden on a very small percentage of Kenyans on income tax, leaving a lot of high income, high net worth Kenyans not paying their commensurate tax. And also corruption has been mentioned. When it comes to revenue, corruption also really affects. So again, the score there for government when it comes to equality in revenue is below. Are we following? Below expectation. When it comes to the expenditure side, again, we expected that there is prudence in the way we expend public resources. We all know the way our government or the budget comes up. In June 2024, the Gen Zs brought out very clear expenditure lines that are inconsistent with what is required. We have First Lady offices, we have so many expenditure lines that are insignificant or not necessary. Right now, we are being told that the State House budget has been doubled to 17 billion. We are dealing with floods, But what is of paramount to our expenditure lines is tea and mandazi for public rallies, because we are heading to the elections. So definitely when it comes to the expenditure side, and even maybe our policy experts could advise, my personal assessment, I'm a lawyer, so I'm allowed to do funny math. Before the 2010 constitution, we had a centralized government. We now have a constitution that has a devolved structure of government, and we have the fourth schedule of the constitution that dictates the functions of each level of government. To what extent have we costed those functions? Ideally, our position has been that money should follow function. So if majority of the health function is being managed by the county governments, we should be seeing that majority of the funds for health sector are with the county governments. If national government is just left with policy, how much money would you be allocating for policy generation and management of level 6 hospitals? So I don't know the extent to which our policy and governance institutions have managed to do a proper costing of the functions at each level of government, so that we are clear that once we are doing the budgeting, we are not, again, just not acting in accordance to what the numbers would be looking like. So on expenditure and government expenditure, again, it is below expectation. Then we come to, there should be like proper equality between present and future generations on how we do investments, both revenue generation and also, and that is now where public debt comes in. Like, you cannot say that we will borrow because now it is not us who will pay. So let us borrow. You are borrowing even for future generations. I don't know, if you go to the Institute of Economic Affairs, they have a live public debt sort of clock that gives you the everyday borrowing, but also gives you a computation of how much, if we were to all pay the debt, I think it is over 100,000 for each Kenyan that is supposed to, if we were to clear our debt and be at the level of Singapore. If you do some research on Singapore, is they say there, the finance guys, their asset vis-a-vis their debt is cancelled, because there are three types of budgets. You have a deficit budget, you have a balanced budget, and you have a surplus budget. For us, we are usually at a deficit budget throughout. But ideally, for countries that are able to manage their debt within their asset portfolio, then you're within acceptable levels. Of course, our economists will speak better to those sort of issues. But on that, again, we are performing below expectation in the fact that we do not clearly have the sort of structures that would allow, I think government has come up with something they call zero-based budgeting. It has never been implemented. We have come up with issues of austerity measures. They have not been implemented, or when they're implemented, they're just implemented to say that we cannot afford capitation for all school-going children, or we cannot afford to pay for university for school kids, but we can afford other non-priority issues. So again, on that we perform below expectations. And then finally, on the constitutionality as a whole, we are not respecting institutions that are supposed. First, Parliament, of course, unfortunately, you're below expectation in terms of your performance on oversight, on as per my own assessment. The Office of the Auditor General is meeting expectations because they have over time recorded all these issues that we have been speaking to. Yeah? They've even gone a step further to introduce what we call citizen accountability audits, where they go beyond just saying, okay, much as you're required to borrow for development and all this, is that development priority for the citizens? Because you can borrow and do F1 track. Is that a priority for the citizens of Kenya? It wouldn't be. So for the Auditor General, I would give them meeting expectations. For the control of budget, where they control the taps, like there is a lot of haziness around what level of control they usually have in how we manage debt, and that has brought the issues now we face with even the pending bills and all these issues. So again, it is below expectations. So in terms of institutional adherence to the legal and institutional frameworks, we are below expectations. So overall, we are below expectations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think I will now invite Mr. Tom to tell us what reclaiming constitutionalism looks like in public finance.
Thank you. I will not go very far from what Titus has said, but what we are seeing is we are in a very, I think my fellow panelists there said, we are not doing as bad as compared to other countries in the region, but I want to say we are doing bad. That was, we are doing bad, guys. If you want to forget about what other countries are doing, just look at us for the past 10 years, how things look like for the past 10 years. I like painting this picture. When we look at governments over time, and with the issue of debt, for instance, when you look at what Kibaki did with debt in these first 4 years, okay? Kibaki borrowed up to around, he increased our debt stock in first 4 years with, I think, 1 point something or thereabout. But the next president did significantly increase it to around 8.5. Kibaki increased by around 5, not 1, around 5%. Then the next increased by 5.8, that's around 6%, the debt stock, because he moved it from 1.77 where he found it to a significant figure. Then when you come to the current regime, they have increased it from 8.5 trillion to 12.5. He has told you in December it was 12.3 trillion. I think this year, up to February, I think it has gone to 12.5 trillion thereabout. That is 12% increase in 4 years in debt stock. Okay? But that does not even paint the picture enough. I also want us to look at Article 43, which is talking about the economic and social rights. And that is where we have the core service sectors. And we need to see how debt servicing is performing against allocations that are going to education sector, allocations going to health sector, allocations that are supposed to be going to even agriculture. If you combine them, debt servicing is still way above. Debt servicing for this current year is supposed to be at it is still estimated at 1.12 trillion. That is still the estimation. But if you look at, not 1.12 actually, it is 1.44 trillion, according to supplementary one. That was just tabled before Parliament the other day. 1.44 trillion. But if you combine what is there in the debt for the social ecosoc sectors, it is we are spending 1 trillion. So, okay, combine all the sectors, you see how we are performing. 2026, 2027, is when we are budgeting for that financial year, right? We are not improving. Debt servicing has been apportioned around 1.52 trillion. The other sectors combined, if you add what the allocations, it is 1.12 trillion. That tells you that where the priority is. If you go back to our constitution, going back to the question, if you go back to our constitution, the first thing that we should be focusing on when we are budgeting is the national interest. Then you go to debt servicing. If you look at the analysis, the math that I've given, which one, where is the priority? Debt servicing. So we are not seeing what we are supposed to see in terms of education. Let me give us another example. Basic education. You know, a government that does not prioritize the future of its children is really, we really have to question where that is actually headed to. I was looking at, I like looking at the development angle of any sector. So when I looked at the basic education, for instance, the development expenditure, when we look at the bigger picture of education sector, we are told that the allocation is going to increase from 703 to a projected 767 billion. And we are saying, wow, money imeongezwa. I went to the basic education. When I looked at the development expenditure for the next financial year, actually they are reducing it with 1 billion. So that means the laboratories that we are saying are missing in some of these infrastructure, in these institutions, might not be realized. There are pupils or there are learners in different corners of these countries who've not seen a laboratory for a physics practical. They don't know how it looks like. When they're going to do practicals, they're being taught on the board. Okay? So that just paints the picture. The other bit is, our constitution is telling us that we should be borrowing for development. We should not borrow. It means the opposite is true. We should not borrow for recurrent expenditure. We should be borrowing to do development. When the fiscal deficit is bigger than the total amount that is going for development, what does that mean? It means that there's some money that is going to be borrowed that is supposed to go into covering recurrent expenditure, and that is against the Constitution. So ideally, our Constitution, the provisions in our Constitution say that let us only focus on borrowing for development expenditure. And we've seen, Titus has mentioned here, that the State House expenditure has actually doubled to 17 billion. It is true, and we are being told through the media that it is more than allocations for White House budget. I don't know what we are doing that the White House cannot do with the dollars that they have. Okay? And most of that might be recurrent expenditure. Okay? So that is one of the challenges that we're having. Another thing is the Public Finance Management Act. I'm just trying to paint the picture. We see how, if we are doing well or not. The Public Finance Management Act is telling us that of the revenue that we collect, not more than 35% should go towards wages and salaries, right? That is being violated both at the county and at the national level. We have county governments that have their wage bills at more than 50%, approaching 60 to 70%. So that tells you that there's a serious disregard to the Constitution. We are yet to see the potential of this Constitution, even if our legislatures are proposing that we do amendments to the Constitution. We are yet to realize the power of this Constitution. We are yet to see how good this Constitution can be. Again, let me just go back again to the Public Finance Management Act. We are told that development versus recurrent expenditure should be at 30-70%. So for development, a minimum of 30% should go to development, and a maximum of 70% should go to what? Should go towards recurrent expenditure. For the longest time, I think since Uhuru's regime, we've never realized that balance. We've never allocated 30% for our development in this country. We've never allocated 30% since the previous government to the current one. We are saying that we are at 26, we are at 25, we are at 27, but we are not at 30. But let me shock us. The only reason we are being told that we are at 26% in towards development expenditure is this, because number one, when the budget, our budget is not 4 trillion. Our panelists said that. The current financial year it is 4.3 trillion, but we've since surpassed that with around, we are estimating with around 200 billion. So it is increasing to that amount. But currently, we are planning to do 4.7 trillion in our budget. So when we are calculating development expenditure, or what is going to development, the first thing that is being done, we remove all the debt obligations from that math. So that after removing that, you remain with the ministerial allocations, then that is what is being used to calculate what is going for development expenditure. And if you include, that means, according to the Constitution, we've tumeweka debt up there. Debt is now up there. These others are down here. Okay? But if we add whatever is going, the total budget, which is 4.7 trillion, what is being allocated for development is less than 20% in that budget. That is how bad we are doing as a country. Okay? We are doing bad. The other thing that I have to say is on why we will see this continuing for the long term. And I think in our projections for the medium term, we can't see us doing any better, is how we do our projections for the revenue. He has done well. He has told us that what we can do right now, the maximum we can do right now is 2.8 trillion in terms of revenue, total revenue that we can collect. What do we see when Treasury or KRA, when the government is projecting revenue? We are saying we can do up to 3-point-something trillion. We are definitely going to miss that target. When we miss that target, what is going to happen? We have to fund that deficit, that gap, through borrowing. And that is why we are seeing what we are seeing. Kibaki wanted to create fiscal space for the private sector, allowing Kenyans, you can access cheap loans from banks. But that since changed when we went for, then Uhuru, who increased our debt stock by 388% from 1.77 trillion to 8.6 trillion. That has a 388% increase, focused on the commercial borrowing from the external market. What we are seeing currently in the current regime, we are focusing mostly on the domestic market. The deficit currently, over 800 billion is going to come from the domestic market. What does that mean to the private sector? Accessing credit is going to be very expensive. It is not going to, we are going to be crowded out. So that is what I wanted to, the picture I wanted to paint. We are not respecting the Constitution. We are also not living according to the principles that we are supposed to live by. And I think that paints the picture that I was asked. For debt, we are at a distress. I want to say that if it is not yet announced, we are going there. It is bad. It is bad because if in 4 years we've increased it by 12%, what do we see in 5 years? What do we see in 10 years if the regime continues for the next 10 years? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tom. I will invite Mr. Emmanuel to briefly tell us what reclaiming constitutionalism in public finance looks like.
All right. Thank you. I want to agree with Tom and Titus that we are not doing well. Yeah. In 2022, we were on the verge of defaulting, and we were fortunate that the markets opened up for us to be able to retire, to raise money to repay the Eurobond. Otherwise, we would have defaulted. And we may not fully appreciate what it means when we are unable to pay our debts, because it has not happened, but we can learn from cases where people have gotten to the point where we are saying we shouldn't get. I don't know, the people seated on that side may not have been alert in 2015, 2016 to know about the Greek debt crisis and the pain that that was to the population, because it means that things happen. The government does or stops doing things that affect you as an individual. So in extreme cases, if you have any money in your bank account, you can lose part of it. Pensions, for those who may have parents who are earning pensions under the defined benefits scheme, where the pensions were being funded by the government slashes the pensions and withdraws a lot of other public goods. So that said, on the question of restoring constitutionalism, I think all the observations we've had in terms of what needs to be done and what has been done from a regulatory perspective, it leads us to the conclusion that the problem we have is not a problem of law. It's a different problem, and I would say it's a problem of leadership. And from a practitioner's perspective, I want to give you a picture of how it is on the side of revenue mobilization or revenue raising. Since 2015, the government has been implementing measures to tighten the nuts and bolts around revenue collection to protect revenue. So the first step was the introduction of iTax, which I believe all of you are familiar with, that returns and payments are made through the iTax, KRA iTax platform. For customs, it's the ICMS. And what that does is that it introduces one, transparency in terms of tax declarations and tax payments. And based on the information that you declare to KRA on iTax, KRA is able to monitor or to mine information or data from what you've declared and make decisions so that it's in a better position to collect revenue from you and from others, and to advise Treasury on legislative changes that are necessary. Yeah, and your PIN. Once you register for a PIN, KRA is able to see that this PIN is inactive, or this PIN files these returns, doesn't file. Then there's integration with other systems. So right now, if you sell a piece of land and you don't declare to KRA, KRA will come to you within a period of less than 6 months to ask you about the gains you made on that piece of land. So there's a lot of information, and we see also KRA calling our clients to ask them, why are you not paying installment tax by this date, or can you pay earlier? Yeah, because they have sight of that information. We saw the introduction of e-teams. So what e-teams is doing is that every time you make a supply, you're required to raise an invoice through a system, KRA system. Let me call it a KRA system. So KRA has sight of every invoice that a supplier makes. If I sell a service, I have to raise an e-teams invoice. And the compliance burden has been transferred to the taxpayer, in that if you're the one buying the service, and you want to claim what I've charged you as an expense, you have to ask me for an ETIMS invoice. Otherwise, you can't claim that expense. So you force me, the seller, to give you an ETIMS invoice. What that means is that if someone has a cost, KRA can see revenue on the other side. So no one, you cannot declare your sales, because people have declared the expenses that they incurred by buying from you. Yeah, and in any case, the system will not allow you to claim an expense which has not been declared as a revenue. And there are all these measures that are being implemented to minimize revenue leakages. The problem is there is so much effort on the revenue side, but when it comes to the expenditure side, there is very little that is happening. No one controls the expenditure, no one checks that. And that's also related or extends to what we are talking about. Deficits are about revenue versus expenditure. So no one cares to maintain a prudent level of expenditure. Yeah. So I frame the problem and consequently the solution into two. One, what we have is a problem of leadership. Let me give you two examples that illustrate that. I believe most of us are following what is happening in the US. And we've seen US was a model country for democracy. If you wanted to look at a yardstick for your democracy, you look at US. But the president has done so much damage to that democracy that the US is no longer a model in the world. We thought it is the institutions that they have that sustain the democracy. But the presidency has a very important role to play in sustaining democracy and that model. That is one. Let me give you another example. The immediate former emir or king of Qatar, you know Qatar? Very prosperous, comparable to the United Arab Emirates. He retired in 2013 and handed over power to his son. Now, if you look at, he had been in power for, is it 18 years? About 18 years, since 1995. Now, what happened for him to take over power is that he overthrew his father while his father was traveling abroad. That's very rare. Yeah. And they had a lot of disputes. Among them was a financial dispute about what his wealth was. And by then, you know, Qatar had discovered oil and was making a lot of money from oil. And his father had no separation between state resources and personal resources. So if Qatar sold oil, you couldn't tell whose money is this. Is it the king's or emir, or is it Qatar's? And when he was overthrown by his son tried to pursue those assets that his father owned. In fact, they even filed cases in London courts to try and recover monies and properties that were in the UK. And thereafter, he implemented systems that ensured that there was a clear separation between the personal wealth of the emir and that of the country. Now, that's an effect of leadership. The other problem and solution, it's not so much of a problem compared to the first one, because it's the citizenry or the population, the people. Now, I know often the people are blamed for electing the wrong leaders. That blame is not entirely warranted. In part, it is warranted. But it's not entirely warranted because the sole reason why we have elections and representatives is because as a crowd we can't make good decisions. So we require good leaders, and sometimes you're not even able to choose good leaders. But the people have a role to play when the leadership fails. And if you look at history, you realize that sometimes it takes a lot of time to get good leadership. I opine that we are, say, a 10th century Britain. And we need to struggle through what we are struggling through, and even have economic collapse, we default, we suffer. Then that is going to awaken us to take the steps that are necessary for us to achieve what the countries that we are emulating or that are doing well have done, either in terms of leadership and in terms of the societal change. So I talked about the Nordic countries in my first contribution. Part of what has happened in those countries is that they are very socialist. They don't appear socialist, but they are very socialist. Governments are very pro-people, and it's the people who have gotten the governments to that point. So we have a duty, if our leadership fails us, to get it to respond to our needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emmanuel. Seeing that time is far much spent, I will kindly request the remaining panelists to please take a minute and to comment on what reclaiming constitutionalism looks like in public finance. Welcome, Ms. Patricia.
Thank you. Let me begin by saying I will not be the one to break the tie of the solemn analysis of Kenya. I do associate with the observations. And when reclaiming constitutionalism, it means that there's something we have not got what we were supposed to do, because going back to what the Constitution was supposed to do, and just Article 1, all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya and shall be done in accordance with this Constitution. Just imagine if we just lived by what the Constitution dictates, we would not even be, we'll be discussing something else. And I'll just focus my closing remarks on the two aspects. One, on the people. And I know we talked about the public participation and all that. The Constitution actually gives us the guide, but the actualization, even when we talk about people even understanding what does debt look like, it is not known. So when sometimes the law demands public participation is done, it's just given lip service. And I'm challenging you to also go look at the public participation bill that is currently out there for comments. It really falls short of what the Constitution demands. And that tells you how really the outlook is for Kenyans. And then secondly, let me go back to the broader governance element. And that is where I have a problem of saying it's difficult to actually blame the people. If we are looking at the three arms of government and look at the public debt situation, who is borrowing the money and who is approving and who is spending it? The crux of the problem is that the executive and parliament. Of course, now the judiciary comes in together with Auditor General and Controller of Budgets as a pushback against unlawful expenditure. And even look at the odious debt case, the amount of money that is the subject of that case. It's the amount of money that can actually shock us. It was around 13.1 trillion. That is the subject matter of that case. And that includes a huge element of, I think, 7.1 of the Eurobond funds. Because in that case, the issue is there was a concealment of borrowing. Also, there is money that was borrowed but did not even reach Kenya, among other elements in that case, including non-approval and just unlawful borrowing. That tells us that we are really, really far from where we are supposed to be. And Parliament, if Parliament played its role, then I think would be a step ahead. But then again, let's look at our current situation. Here is a parliament that really doesn't have an opposition or an alternative voice within parliament. So if we expect, and that's why it's a broader conversation about elections, political parties, representation, multipartism, independence of institutions. It's all that actually implicates why we are here. And that's where all these points are connected. And now let's talk about even expenditure, for instance. We give the budget, we give debt decisions as a priority in budget making process. And then the money that is left, then we divide it for expenditure, we divide it for devolution. What means is the higher the debt burden, it means when the money going to counties goes down, the money going to services goes down. And Article 21 reminds us the duty of the state is to promote, protect, fulfill rights. Even when you talk about economic and social rights, there is the obligation of progressive realization. So between Kibaki and Ruto today, and let me pick out education as he did, can we say we are progressively realizing education or even health? I think if we were to interrogate those numbers, the answer would be no. So it means even the budget as it is being made is actually violating the Constitution. And just to close this, to say that in response to the question he asked us about, would you raise your hand to say we should increase the taxation? Of course, the answer is no, but because, yes, we get revenue, as he said, but the expenditure, it is, we are not closing the gaps on expenditure. Why would State House, for instance, or even let's look at the executive alone, it has a bigger budget than collectively what we are sending to 47 counties. That is anomalous. Why, for instance, would a judiciary, as a third arm of government that has reach across the country, has a lesser budget than what an agency in the executive has, or even Parliament itself, you know? And then the broader problems we have even with Parliament is Parliament not understanding or failing to actually realize its legislation. Oversight here is the crux of what Parliament is to be doing. But what is Parliament doing? They have decided it's better to maintain CDF funds. Even when we challenge them in court, they entrench them in the Constitution. And we are yet challenging broader constitutionality of some of the decisions that are being made. And just to close and say, we have a problem with our value system. If Article 10 informed every public decision making, including public debt, we apply all those principles, including the principle that we tend to forget, sustainable development. This is where intergenerational justice comes in. We would actually be a step ahead. And my prognosis is also not good because we are seeing consistent violations. It's easy to cut expenditure for health services, but not prosecute corruption cases. So even the money that is being lost, we are not seeing the outcome. But then also, even as we think about the conversation about debt with Kenya in the global context, and this is another discussion for another day, is looking also at the reforms in the global debt architecture and the injustice that has happened between where we say Africa is and many countries, and the debt architecture in the multi-corporations, the lending institutions. And even one of the reasons why the odious debt case is here is because it's also looking towards creating lenders' liability. Because you can't just say we have given you money, it's a commercial transaction that Kenyans did not sign up to. If you were to interrogate Article 1 very deeply, there's a sovereignty question there, and then there's a lender's liability question there. Just to say that for me is when we focus on the people and the Constitution and what institutions the Constitution has put out for us, we are not doing well because the Constitution is being disregarded and being disregarded without accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patricia. I will welcome Madam Ivy.
Thank you. Many articles of the Constitution have been mentioned, so I'll look at Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity and ask the question, is it ethical for people to go behind closed doors and sign off our sovereignty? Because that's what's happening. Is it ethical for our leaders to, again, behind those closed doors, she's mentioned commercial loans, that now we are going for commercial loans while there's also the option of concessional ones. So we have very high interest rates to pay. Is it ethical for our leaders to also offer collateral when we know the risks that come with it, as with the case of Sri Lanka, which because of their failure to repay their debt have now lost access to their port for 99 years. That's us giving up Mombasa for 99 years. I mean, it's a lot. This is one of those things that makes your blood boil, because the repercussions are dire. And it's scary that there's even the thought of there's a possibility of us going the default way in a couple of years. So we're in a risky situation. You've mentioned Article 1 of the Constitution. When we say our sovereignty is at stake, it's at stake. The more debt you accrue, it means the less say you have over your internal matters. So the government stops being a government for the people, but it becomes a government for the creditors because you're just moving. When they cough, you jump. I focus more on information rights, and so I would say that is one of the areas that we need to really look at. Access to information. Right now in Kenya, it's being treated as a privilege. It's only for the privileged in society. It's while it's actually a right for us to know what is going on. These loans and these agreements should not be secret. Right now, they are hiding behind secrecy, very wide-ranging secrecy clauses for protection of commercial interests, but we know what is being hidden in there. So access to information, freedom of expression, public participation, only through the citizens knowing what is there and interrogating it and putting their leaders to the task to be able to explain their decisions, can we actually then say that we stand by the decisions that they're making. And ideally, if we are able to everyone has a voice in Kenya, everyone has an opinion. Even if my opinion does not sound right to you, I need to be given an opportunity to share it, and for all of us to collectively raise our voices and be heard, so that we also have ownership of these debts. We would be happy to pay these debts if we knew where and saw where they were going. I'd be happy, as you said, for the VAT to go to 20% if it means that no cancer patient has to go to India. I'd be happy to pay that if I knew that no child in Kenya will ever drop out of school. I mean, in a society that services are actually being performed, we don't have to do fundraisings for everything, then yes, if he had framed the question that way, I believe more of us would have raised our hands. So I think access to information is our key.
Thank you very much, Madam Ivy. Welcome, Mr. Jacob.
Thank you once more for the opportunity, and thank you to all our participants. I know we've kept you sitting, but thank you for your patience. So I think for me, my really concluding remarks are that our public finances are really facing a lot of strain because things have changed. The population has grown, and this population, everybody is looking for quality life. Everybody is looking up to their government to provide them with the basic needs, goods and services, and so on. And as my colleague from TISA said, we are unable to achieve the 30% development and 70% recurrent. We are doing more of recurrent. I think one thing that is really contributing to that high recurrent expenditure that is crowding out development is especially the wage bill. And as you know, the wage bill is really as a product of employment of new people, and also the wages that actually we get paid from employment. And you see, this is a very sensitive issue, because today, if you are to ask any Kenyan, would you be willing, for example, the government to just cut down on your salary so that we manage the wage bill? Honestly, I think no Kenyan will really be happy to have your salary or even your wages reduced. In fact, all of us will really be happy if our wages go up. So I think we are really living in very tough times. Revenue-wise, our capacity is quite limited. We normally call it the fiscal envelope. There is so much you can do, yeah. But on the expenditure side, we really have a lot of expenditures to take care of. And also the issue of legacy. Legacy is really a big factor here. Every government would want that by the time your term is coming to an end, there is a legacy you want to leave here, right from President Moi, President Kibaki, President Uhuru Kenyatta, President Ruto, and even the others who will come after. Everybody, there is a legacy you want to leave. And therefore, because of that legacy, usually it starts from the manifesto. So, you present a manifesto to the people. You tell them, Kenyans, if you were to put me in this office, I promise you this is what I'll do for you. So there is a legacy issue which now results into all these problems. But as I conclude, I just want to assure everybody in this team that the people who are in that space, talk of treasury, talk of central bank, talk of even parliament, I can assure you without doubt, those are the best brains we have in terms of fiscals. Yeah? Even just walk, I can challenge all of you, just walk to our public debt management office, PDMO. They are actually on, I think, 7th floor of Treasury. When you have a discussion with those people, just go and hold just an impromptu discussion with them, yeah? Because I've talked to so many of them. The brain is there, yeah? And all these things we are talking, they know, yeah? But I can assure you, it is an issue of the circumstances we face. Even the president, I'm sure he would be happy to see all our fiscal rules, PFM, constitution. He would really be happy to see us satisfying all our fiscal rules. But if you see we are not able to achieve, then it is a bigger problem. So for me, I think my rallying call to all of us, let us do our best to support this problem. No, not really to support the problem, but sorry about that. To support the policy makers in place to address the problem. Because for me, I think, yes, we can argue, we can complain, why are you not doing this? But you see, we are all in this ship, and if it sinks, we all sink. So for me, the rallying call really is, if you have ideas, yeah, if you have ideas which you feel, these ideas I have, I am ready to present them to the relevant stakeholders, and we call upon also the relevant stakeholders to follow the advice they get. Because Kipra, for example, we do a lot of policy advice. I think Chacha will tell you, we do a lot of policy advice. Do this, don't do this. But sometimes the take-up of that advice is not easy, yeah? Even the public debt, not public debt management office, but the what is it called? Parliamentary Budget Office, yeah, PBO. They have the best brains, I can assure you. So colleagues, I really want to assure you that these problems, we know them. People understand what is going on. We have even the solutions, but I think now it is really time to re-look at all our fiscal ecosystem. That's what I can conclude with. We really need to relook at our entire fiscal ecosystem. And as Kenyans, we need to be bold also to accept the realities. That, for example, if the government next financial year announced that for us to achieve 70% recurrent, Kenyans, these are the consequences. I think then as Kenyans, we should be ready to really go with the consequences. If they say next financial year, no borrowing, they will tell us what the consequences will be. And therefore, as Kenyans, we really need also to be ready to embrace the consequences. So I'm just trying to paint a picture that it's a complex scenario, not very easy the way you can see it, but it's really complex. But we pray that, with God's intervention, all will work well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We'll get our final reflections from our final panelist, Mr. Chacha. Welcome.
Thank you. I think the question that's framed has been one of the most difficult questions I've seen, and I hope I won't be below par, as my colleague over here said. Anyway, in terms of the constitutional makeup of the structure of parliament, I won't really comment much on that, because constitutionalism as framed in the question, it's a matter that starts and stops or changes every 5 years. The policies that we'll put in place in the next 10 years will depend on what you do in the next election cycle. If I would really try to encourage the people within the civil society organization that right now, opportunity to teach people, inform people what it means to vote. If you have 1 billion shillings, but you lack 1 shilling, you can't be a billionaire. It doesn't matter what you do. That one vote that you have today means a lot. Together, we have to hold each other's hands and understand that this is Kenya, and you have to learn how to use your vote. Otherwise, the concept of leadership and governance is you who will change it. For me, I will sit down within the term of parliament and look in what I'm handling, and I will say, this is the process we're working with. And there's nothing we can do within that 5-year period. So constitutionalism is a very technical term to cover, and if you now link it to public finances, why it's so difficult is that what my colleagues have mentioned is that, like today, there's a loan that was taken by Kibaki that we are still repaying. When you take a loan, it locks you up for the next 10, 20 years. It can be a domestic bond, can be a commercial debt. And this one is going to traverse different governments. So the decision that you make today is very important. To reclaim this particular aspect, I'm trying to think with constitutionalism within the public finance framework. Number one, you have to learn how to make the decisions today. Constitution, we're always being told that it's a living, breathing document. And, when I was coming here, I was reminded about my Christian faith and that point where Pilate washed his hands and said, crucify him. That's what the Constitution does to you. The Constitution will wash its hands and tell you make your decision how you're going to make it. We have been trying to learn what the Constitution means since 2010. Every year we come in with new structures, new perspectives. We see court rulings, and so many things have made Parliament to understand that, the opinions of the people matter. And I don't even think we're beginning to touch the cracks of what this Constitution as designed really means for the people. But what I'm trying to tell you is that the decisions you make, it comes down to what you make, the decisions you make. It builds up to the governance structures that you'll get, the governance design, the people who sit in those seats and the decisions that they make. Because I'm saying this because 10 years ago, the decisions that were made 10 years ago are affecting us today. The decisions we make today will affect us 20 years from now. To reclaim this aspect in public policy, we have to look, number one, at the public finances. As you've been indicated, you've been told it's not easy. It's a very complex. When you're dealing with public debt stock and debt servicing, it is very difficult. And especially when your fiscal space is decreasing over time, and that's what's happening. When you see students not getting capitation, when you see health centers not having medicine, disbursements, spending bills and all that, it's just a systematic indicator of what is going on in the system. And these changes can't be solved by, there's no one-stop policy. If we began to change what we're doing today, no amount of court rulings. No, we need, unless the court rulings that we have leads to a bill of parliament. So if, let's say, you go to court and there's a ruling given, then you as lawyers have to design a solution which is a bill, an act of parliament, an action that changes the overall aspect of fiscal policy in Kenya in a manner that it won't affect us. It will affect us today, but last in a sustainable manner into the next 10, 20 years from now. When you sit there, your children will say, this act, because of this court ruling, changes things. The other aspect is public trust. Us, within the public sector, need to create that public trust. And that cost of public trust, I have seen it myself. When we went, and we were there when Parliament was getting burnt down. People are running helter-skelter. We were seeing the mess being carried that way. It was an interesting day, but that building belongs to the people, by the way, yeah? So you can do with it whatever. Yeah? But that day, the next week, I was running through my numbers. And the cost impact was, I had a 200 billion shock on my debt stock, like that. It was an action that was done, I agree. But then public debt stock just shot up, like that. 200 billion shillings, because we removed the financing above the line, maintained the expenditures, shot the fiscal deficit up. The issue I'm talking about this not in terms of a mistake was made, but it was a cost on public trust by us. And people were passing in front of the National Treasury to come and ban Parliament, by the way. And the bill didn't even come from Parliament, it came from the National Treasury. So people were walking very nicely, they came, they did their thing there, and that day, it was a very interesting day. But public trust in the laws that we make, the policies that we do. I read the Adani deal. I sat down, I went through the entire volume of the entire document. Adani was arguing from a commercial perspective. He was saying, they come up and they put all sorts of requirements that we want to take over the app, we will do everything. In fact, give us tax exemption. It is them who are giving their proposal from a private sector perspective. It is you, as a government, as a parliament, to ensure that you stand your ground and come up with a policy that can serve, the people of Kenya and reduce those, illegalities or dreams that the private sector might have in some of these projects. So public trust is something that is very important. So for my part, I think I'll tell you that the ultimate decision from this Constitution of Kenya that we have since 2010, if you sit here as an individual, you have to actively participate in governance. Number two, we need to take time and elect and teach people, educate people what the power of their vote means. It's a very critical aspect. It doesn't, after election, it doesn't matter how much noise you make. You have another 5 years, you have to sit down and wait. Policies will change, but the Constitution has to be applied as is. And you will advise me on that. The other aspect, again, is fiscal policy in a sustainable manner. The fiscal space is shrinking, and that's why you will see all these shortages in resources being released, or electric spending bills and all that, and the government moving into PPPs, securitization and all that, is just a government that is running out of fiscal space trying to maintain expenditure at the same level. But then also, finally, we have to learn to live within our means. At some point, as my colleague from Kipra said, I think it's a difficult situation, but to take that turnaround period, either has to start today before we have to let it be gradual change instead of an immediate change. Let it sort of behave like the wheel of justice that turns. So it's a wheel that turns towards justice, something like that. You know that? Yes. Let it take a long curve. But the public debt stock and constitutionalism, and if you're going to provide education, healthcare, all those services the government is supposed to provide, there's nothing such as free government services, by the way. Someone has to pay for it from somewhere. It's either front-loaded or back-loaded, you know. If you're told it's free education, no. There's a taxation component that is levied on someone to pay for that aspect. If you're told it is free healthcare, those of you who will join the workforce and you'll see that share deduction, or free housing, that housing deduction, that's when you will know that there's nothing free. It has to be paid for. So the entire ecosystem is something that has to be really worked on. But for me, I remain hopeful because of one thing. The Constitution of Kenya, the way it was created, was very broad thinking. And I really thank the lawyers who did that job. There are some aspects that will cost us in terms of expenditure, but will adjust. But things like the judiciary system, a lot of things that have been passed by Parliament, most of the times we know it will just go to court, you know, and some of these things we get to enjoy in Kenya that don't happen in Uganda and Tanzania. And when you see lawyers arguing on TV, and you become very proud that we have a profession that can stand out in the rest of the world, I think we are like the best lawyers ever, you know, because we have an ecosystem that allows us to discuss the issues that affect Kenyans on a daily basis and is active, and you can go to court and do that. So it is, the governance system is a sort of well-balancing system. There is checks and balances here and there, but the judiciary is there to oversight all these angles that is there. But the issue is that when you create, we know the problem, and I take you back to the question of, so what? So you've told me there's an issue. So what? Where is the solution? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chacha. Thank you very much, our distinguished panelists. We will just take 2 questions from the audience. Just 2. Yes, we'll have him.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So mine is actually just a comment based off of the discussion that I had. Out of all the panelists, I've just it's only one comment that has intrigued me, the last comment. And his emphasis on us voting and how important our vote is. And he has tried to emphasize on how we need to be educated on why should we say that our vote is important. And I'll try to explain that in about 2 minutes. Just allow me, I'm going to take 1 minute, so I assume it's a question, but it's a comment I just want to make because it's an important one. Based on why is our vote very important? Because it's a conversation, it's a national conversation we are having as Gen Zs. So allow me to say this. Kenya is quickly becoming Nigeria. Why am I saying this? Kenya is the hub where people come to refine corrupt money. Wanakuja kusafisha pesa Kenya. And how do we end up with the type of leaders we end up with? We have these leaders who vie for, who want to become members of parliament, but they have to be financed by these proxies that do illegal businesses within the country. And these proxies, when they take these leaders into power, then they become chained leaders. You see, these leaders who voted yes to the Finance Bill 2025, they didn't do so because they believed that the Finance Bill was a good bill that will help Kenyans. It is because they pocketed some money. I know I'm risking going to jail, but I have to say it. So, if you're not ready to vote for broke leaders to change the situation in Kenya, then all these conversations you're having is inconsequential. Because, as he has said, it is our leaders that bring all these problems. Our constitution is very perfect. The laws we have in Kenya are enough to make everything work. But it is our leaders that are letting us down. The members of parliament are not doing what they're supposed to do. They are an extension to the executive. William Samoei Ruto is not a bad leader. He's just chained because of the proxies he serves when he's trying to finance his campaigns. So you have to open your eyes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think if there are no further questions, I would like to really thank our distinguished panels once again. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the conversations. Thank you very much. We have a token of appreciation for our panelists. So I will invite the president of the 14th edition of the All Kenya Moot Court Competition, Frasha Kuria, to give the awards. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. A round of applause once again for our panelists. That was a very, very powerful panelist, getting perspectives from both civil society, policy makers, and also the government point of view. At this point, I'd also like us to give a round of applause to the moderator of the panel. She did a good job. And now we'll allow our panelists and partners to step outside to have some tea, and then we're going to remain with all participants for the briefing so that we can proceed to our rooms. Thank you so much. A round of applause as they go out. I'll invite Aisha Swale, who's going to do the participants briefing. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So, for the observers who are here, you can also feel free to go have some tea. But yes, I would love to stay back with the participants, please. Just the participants. I believe the researchers as well are briefed. I hope so.
Ametikiwa
participants. Mko nervous? Nasikia nervous? I bet you'll do great. You've been prepared. Mmekuwa mki-prepare. And what's the wording? God... I'm sorry, but God rewards hard work. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. So, nitaanza kuambia all the best. The main purpose of this competition is to learn from young legal minds. We want to see the ideas you've come up with, the arguments you've come up with. This is just take it as a learning experience. Don't take it as the end of the world. If you don't proceed, you have made it this far. That itself is an achievement. And also still enjoy the competition because mnajua inaendanga till Friday. There is Supreme Court. If there are participants interested in going to the Supreme Court, please be around by Thursday because you know we usually have, when you're disqualified, mnamua memalizana na sisi. But yes, we usually, mkitaka kuja acha, yo discuss. Anyway, so for the briefing, you have your pooling. I think each and every participant has seen the team pooling. Yes. So we have 8 courtrooms for these preliminary rounds 1. And courtroom 1, 2, and 3 are on this side of the school. 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are on the other side of the school. So please check which room you are in. Take note of what I've said. Now I have volunteers here with me who will be guiding you to the said courtrooms. I would, ndio hao hapo. But before we ask you to start disbursing, I'll let Diego briefly talk about how the rounds will be, maybe code of conduct, etc.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a lovely morning. As you've heard, my name is Cynthia Yego, Deputy Head of Moot. And so basically, we'll have the first preliminary rounds. If you check the schedule, you'll notice that courtrooms 1 to 4, you have the first team starting immediately, and then after that, you'll have the second team go in. So for example, if you're in courtroom 1, that means that immediately after this session, you're expected to move to your courtroom, and then the other team, for example, team 14, you'll have to wait until the first rounds end, and then you'll have your first preliminary rounds. So apart from that, I don't think I have anything else. Aisha, kindly direct this.
Where are the researchers in the room, please? Okay. But researchers, please follow Fahim outside. This is Fahim. Karaoke, he's our Deputy Head of Research. Now, another thing maybe I'll mention is how the rounds are going to be till Friday. We have the preliminary rounds 1 today. And because of time, we didn't want to crowd today, so we'll have the preliminary rounds 2 tomorrow morning. And then we will have the rounds of 16 in the afternoon. And then we will have on Thursday, the quarters in the morning, semi-finals in the afternoon, and then finally, finals on Friday. Now, for the teams that are on heat 2, like the second round, please, the waiting room is here. So even, I feel like for now you will leave to go see your room, where the room will be. But participants, please remain here for the duration of the time you're waiting, so that when your court is about to start or when your session is about to start, we send a volunteer to come pick you and take you to your court once again. So yes, other than that, there's really nothing else. So the teams, Kate, you have something to say? Please.
Hi everyone. So we have tea break for everyone.
Because of time, the participants will not have tea break. I apologize, but mtakunywa chai haraka. Guys, 10 minutes. Please, but I feel like first, and then you to monitor your courtrooms.
All Kenyan Moot Court competition. I'd like to My name is Frasha Mwihaki Kuria, and I'm honored to be serving as the president of the 14th edition of the All Kenyan Moot Court competition. I'd like to welcome you to the opening ceremony for this edition. It means a great honor for us to be hosting you. We have been working towards this since May 2025, and it is inspiring to see our dream come true and our vision come to life. The theme for this edition also means a great deal to us. Our theme is on reclaiming constitutionalism, and it is a call for all of us to remember to go back to the heart of the Constitution, even in moments of national challenges. To our partners, we'd like to thank you so much for supporting AKMCC, for believing in our vision, and for forever opening your doors to our initiative. We hope that all participants get to learn a lot during this entire week, and we hope that even as we continue with subsequent editions, AKMCC will continue to grow in scale and impact. And with that, it's always an honor to serve as the president. My name is Frasha Mwihaki Kuria, and I'm honored to be serving as the president of the 14th edition of the All Kenyan Moot Court competition. I'd like to welcome you to the opening ceremony for this edition. It means a great honor for us to be hosting you. We have been working towards this since May 2025, and it is inspiring to see our dream come true and our vision come to life. The theme for this edition also means a great deal to us. Our theme is on reclaiming constitutionalism, and it is a call for all of us to remember to go back to the heart of the Constitution, even in moments of national challenges. To our partners, we'd like to thank you so much for supporting AKMCC, for believing in our vision, and for forever opening your doors to our initiative. We hope that all participants get to learn a lot during this entire week, and we hope that even as we continue with My name is Frasha Mwihaki Kuria, and I'm honored to be serving as the president of the 14th edition of the All Kenyan Moot Court competition. I'd like to welcome you to the opening ceremony for this edition. It means a great honor for us to be hosting you. We have been working towards this since May 2025, and it is inspiring to see our dream come true and our vision come to life. The theme for this edition also means a great deal to us. Our theme is on reclaiming constitutionalism, and it is a call for all of us to remember to go back to the heart of the Constitution, even in moments of national challenges. our partners, we'd like to thank you so much for supporting AKMCC, for believing in our vision, and for forever opening your doors to our initiative. We hope that all participants get to learn a lot during this entire week, and we hope that even as we continue with subsequent editions, AKMCC will continue to grow in scale and impact. And with that, it's always an honor to serve as the president. My name is Frasha Mwihaki Kuria, and I'm honored to be serving as the president of the 14th edition of the All Kenyan Moot Court competition. I'd like to welcome you to the opening ceremony for this edition. It means a great honor for us to be hosting you. We have been working towards this since May 2025, and it is inspiring to see our dream come true and our vision come to life. The theme for this edition also means a great deal to us. Our theme is on reclaiming constitutionalism, and it is a call for all of us to remember to go back to the heart of the Constitution, even in moments of national challenges. To our partners, we'd like to thank you so much for supporting AKMCC, for believing in our vision, and for forever opening your doors to our initiative. We hope that all participants get to learn a lot during this entire week, and we hope that even as we continue with subsequent editions, AKMCC will continue to grow in scale and impact. And with that, it's always an honor to serve as the president.